We became one of the pioneers, certainly, in inner city building in the city. It got popular over the years. And before you know it, we had a ton of competitors following our footsteps. But we were really the first one that began in that neighborhood and eventually in many other, let's call it their transitional neighborhoods more than anything. And now it's a very different market.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owners Association, where real estate investors have found success since 1968. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group. This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Get ready for the Midwest Real Estate Investor Conference in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Join hundreds of real estate investors for networking, learning, and growth. Be sure to mark your calendars for April 24th and 25th of 2025. Hello and welcome to episode 470. My guest today is a successful inner city builder, real estate investor, and developer with over 25 years of experience. Jose Berlanga's story is one of building, losing, and rebuilding from the ground up, setback after setback. Jose has achieved multimillionaire status in 4 different industries: petrochemical machinery imports, Italian coffee bars, residential construction, and land development. Jose, welcome to the show.
Brian, how are you? It's great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to become a successful business owner and real estate investor.
I've been an entrepreneur for several decades now. I think some people stumble across entrepreneurship by accident and some voluntarily. I may have been a little bit of both. I wanted to own a business and I wanted to be in control of my destiny from the time I was very young. I was not one of those entrepreneurs that immediately knew how to go about it. Something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs need to understand, that sometimes the ideas don't come to you immediately and you just have to keep searching and try to look for an idea that appeals to you and an industry that appeals to you and just start at some point, which is what I did. As soon as I had a chance to begin this journey of entrepreneurship, I started in where I think I got a little bit of luck without really knowing it, is that I started young enough where I could afford to learn, what I could afford to investigate this life choice without needing to make money immediately. So I think, as a matter of fact, when you remove the pressure from entrepreneurship, from a startup, you tend to do a little bit better than when you immediately need to start making money and you're carrying a lot of debt or you're bringing in a lot of investors. I started very, very small in the import-export, and it gradually took off. This was a great opportunity back then in the 80s, actually, when I was in college. We didn't have internet. We didn't have international commerce that was so well established. So I became a middleman for the import-export that provided maintenance, parts, machinery for the petrochemical industry in Mexico and Latin America that didn't have a lot of English-speaking people that could help them do their acquisitions, to do maintenance for their plants. And so I did that for a while, and that business carried me to the next one and the next one. And before you know it, I've been in a number of businesses for all these years.
I want to talk about the petrochemical import-export. Like, what exactly was your function in that? Were you the middleman bringing it in from overseas or other countries? I mean, explain that to our audience, what that looks like.
It was a very interesting business, which still exists, but very differently. It's much more sophisticated and technologically advanced, not to mention now in Latin America, everybody speaks English. But when I got here to the US, there was a very popular industry, which was to be a broker of, and let me take it back a minute. During the Industrial Revolution, all these plants, factories, were built in Mexico, Central America, Latin America. They were all built with European and American products, American machinery, from motors, pumps, reactors, transformers, valves, electrical panels, wiring, you name it, everything, even, from condensers, from smaller parts to the bigger reactors, everything was American made or European made and imported into Mexico and Latin America. But at some point, these plants began to require maintenance and replacement of parts. All of the engineers down in these regions in south of the border, they weren't quite certain. They didn't know, they didn't have the know-how on where and how to locate parts and maintenance for their plants. So they needed a broker. They needed someone in the US that they could call. Back then, imagine I had a telex where my business was conducted, There were no cell phones. There was not even a fax. Forget a computer. That kind of happened over time. So I began with valves and piping, which is the industry that my father was in. He taught me the ropes, got me involved with a few of his contacts. And when I started investigating the business and trying to sell my valves and going down to Mexico to visit clients, they would inquire. They go, "Hey, you're in the United States. Can you help me find this motor? I need it. I have this plant that's on hold. I can't fire it up until you help me out with it." So before you know it, I was selling a bunch of other stuff to all of these companies, and I thought I would retire from this business. Interestingly enough, that was my initial takeoff as an entrepreneur, but destiny had other plans for me, I suppose.
In the 80s, a time before the internet and like you said, faxes and cell phones, I mean, was this primarily like a face-to-face and over the telephone kind of business where you're going back and forth and just making phone calls? Or, I mean, what other systems were there that you could leverage to help your business?
That was it. I had a telex, not a fax, which means you could type a message with pricing, with information, FedEx and DHL to send brochures, to send catalogs, and good old traveling with my briefcase. I remember it like it was yesterday, getting on a plane, setting up some appointments by phone here in the US. Hey, I'm here in Houston, which is where oil and gas very, very heavily in the oil and gas and petrochemical. I'm here. I have a great network of distributors and manufacturers. I have all the information. We have a great service for you that can be helpful to provide maintenance for your plants and your factories. And there I go, getting on a plane with my briefcase and my catalogs. That was it. I faced so much rejection, though, because most of these people had already their own relationships, or some of them had direct access to the manufacturers and so on and so forth. Some of these manufacturers already had offices in some of these major cities. So it wasn't easy. It was knocking on doors and facing with a lot of rejection, getting kicked out of many offices. No, thank you. Maybe next time. And eventually one day you start being there at the right time with the right person that happens to need something. And the business went well until it didn't, until the economy changed, of course, and until technologies began to innovate and so on and so forth. There were speed bumps in the economy down there where people began to slow down on their payments. This is how I went out of business the first time. It was a multi-million-dollar industry business for us. And all of a sudden, they stopped paying on time and they started dragging their feet on making the payments. So as a result, I started falling behind on paying my vendors until they broke me. That was the end of my first enterprise.
And you thought you would retire from that business, but fate had other plans. How did you pick yourself up and what did you move back onto?
Very slowly. At first, it was taxing on me emotionally because I really thought that this is something that I understood. that I liked doing. I enjoyed that business and I was good at it at the time. I had the social skills, the public relations. And it took me a little while to just come to terms with my new reality of and trying to figure out what to do, because I felt that I didn't really have experience in other areas or any specific talents. So it took a while before I recognized that other people had already seen me as an entrepreneur, and I started getting other opportunities and other offers come to me of other contacts and friends that were in different businesses that would come to me and tell me, hey, you understand business and I am working on this new project or this new product. Why don't we go and do it together? So I didn't realize that I had already built a little bit of a reputation of someone that was reliable and hardworking and ethical. And sometimes we don't know that. We think that if one of our businesses failed, that will be the end of our lives. But if you keep working and keep going at it, there will be more opportunities, which happened to me at that point.
Part of your bio is talking about, setback after setback. So before we get on to the success with real estate, just can you tell us like some of your other setbacks and possibly some of your failures along the way?
There were plenty. You mentioned 4 big falls that I had or big starts in the business world, but I had many small ones, many attempts. I was very big on startups. I love the concept of starting businesses, of coming up with ideas and concepts in different industries. I love marketing. I love advertising. I love manufacturing. It was a blessing and a curse because I was a little bit scatterbrained in getting involved in multiple things and overcommitting myself to people that would bring me ideas or think that I had more capital than I really did. And I would figure out how to raise it and how to put people together. And I would get involved in multiple businesses and startups and or involved in growing pains of companies that I got involved with. But many of them didn't really go anywhere. So it wasn't until I would, but this is another interesting part, when I eventually focused on one concept, it would begin to do well. So the second time around, it was a mixture of several businesses that I either invested in or participated as an operator. I own some restaurants. I own another exporting company that export different types of products to Central and Latin America, from paper products, labels, and a few other things. Back then, it was still very popular. The commerce between the U.S. and Central and South America was growing quite a bit. I got into a chain of coffee houses that began to do very well, which at some point we had the opportunity of selling it for quite a bit of money. But I think we got stubborn and decided to build it into a monster company and attempt to go much further. When Starbucks kicked in and came to town and started opening stores everywhere, and it caught us very over leveraged at that point. So there I go again, where my businesses were doing very, very well. And all of a sudden getting caught in a bad situation with a lot of leverage caused me to fail. I never officially went bankrupt, which is something I highly recommend entrepreneurs. It's okay if you run out of money. It's okay if you close a business. It's okay if you lose a business altogether, but just don't get to that point where you have to officially consider yourself bankrupt, because that will stay on your record for life, and you will find it much more difficult to get back on your feet. So I never got to that point where I got to a bankruptcy. I simply lost businesses. I lost my capital and had to start all over. And the reason why it happened in different industries was because those are the opportunities that came to me. I didn't feel that remaining in those somewhat either obsolete industries or already very complicated, it wasn't the smart thing. There were always so many new and innovative ways to go about and turn the page that I would get attracted to those and move on. So that's how one day I ended up in real estate.
My takeaway from that is that you're a serial entrepreneur who was maybe spread a little too thin across a lot of different businesses. And I think I heard you say when you started focusing on one, that's when you found success. And is that where real estate kicks in?
Yes, that is when when I began to understand that, part of my dream was to own businesses, not to operate them. Perhaps this is part of my early stages of failing experiences. I attribute some of my downfalls to two things. One was that I was really focused on profiting, making money, rather than understanding the problem that I was solving and what was I contributing to the industry. I was very money oriented in my early years. Secondly, I didn't see myself as the operator. I did not like to sit behind a desk. I was a very ADD guy, a deal maker, the guy who wanted to put the deals together and pass them on to someone else. Over time, I realized that when I was starting and building and creating these concepts, I couldn't get away with just putting the deal and passing it on to people that didn't have enough stake or enough accountability or enough love or passion or skin in the game in the business. I began to learn that over time, which is where the focus came in. When I started the real estate company with my brother, who was an architect, I felt a high level of responsibility to participate more in the day-to-day. I didn't at first. It was hard. I thought maybe I can invest some money, buy a few properties, and the business will begin to establish itself and grow. But as I put more and more investment and a little more time, I began to understand the needs of the industry, the high level of competition, and how much it really required from me. So the business kind of sucked me into a day-to-day activity, and before you know it, I'm operating the company, working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week for years until we built it. But that's when things began to work better for me, once I made that decision that I had to be fully involved in it.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. Save the date for the Midwest Real Estate Investor Conference happening April 24th and 25th of 2025 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This event is the perfect place to connect with fellow real estate investors, gain valuable insights, and elevate your real estate game. With a lineup of expert speakers and numerous networking opportunities, you won't want to miss it. What was the real estate business? I mean, what exactly were you doing and where were you doing it?
Single family construction. We began with one little bungalow in revitalizing inner city neighborhoods. Back in the 80s, in the late 80s, all the inner cities were very forgotten. Everybody was moving to the suburbs because it was easier for bigger developers.
Which inner city are we talking about? Where were you?
We began in Houston, one of the oldest subdivisions, one of the first, if not the first, master plan community in Houston was called the Houston Heights. It had been forgotten for a few decades, where it was literally scary graffiti, crack houses, tear downs. And we went in there and started buying a few properties and building some very inexpensive entry-level homes. It was very speculative. It wasn't popular to build in the inner city back then. And we took a gamble. We speculated on the business with a very small investment. Also, it was a very simple way to get started because we didn't need that much capital. So it made sense to start with very few dollars to build a house. Then we built 2, then we went to 4, and we were so frugal, so responsible, reinvesting our money into the business that the business took off. We didn't realize the timing was right, but we also did our part and became very, very responsible with our money, with our finances, with our work ethics, just putting so much effort into it. And I felt that responsibility to get more and more involved in the day-to-day. So the business grew, and we became one of the pioneers, certainly, in inner city building in the city. It got popular over the years, and before you know it, we had a ton of competitors following our footsteps. But we were really the first one that began in that neighborhood, and eventually in many other, let's call it their transitional neighborhoods more than anything. And now it's a very different market.
You went into a very risky market, risky neighborhoods, and you were able to do that with a kind of a low barrier to entry, low cost. How were you able to recognize that you were finding success? I mean, was there a moment when you said, oh, wait a minute, we're starting to make money? And what did that look like?
There was a single moment that determined where we were headed. And it wasn't the moment when we started making money. It was the moment when we sold the first house that we built. Because in the back of my mind, I had concerns that we were building something unsellable, that we were building this little house in a neighborhood that had not been proven, where there was no market, where nobody had attempted to try selling houses around there, surrounded with teardowns. And when that home sold, it gave me the view now that there was a market that we could follow and start building. But we didn't even make money on that first exercise. But I told myself, well, I guess we have something. The product sold. Now we need to go back to the drawing board and tweak our numbers, figure out how to improve our margins, reduce our costs, maybe redesign some things, maybe build a few more at a time to start enjoying some of these famous economies of scale. And that's what we did. But it took us a few years, actually, before we made a profit. But we just kept going and kept putting money into the business and not living off of it at first.
Were you able to take that same concept and move it to other cities besides Houston and expand out with it?
The answer is no. We did not go to any other cities, because every time we attempted to, we realized that we were in such a big market, and the business model that we were in, we were kind of a boutique builder. We were not a tract home builder that was building homes by the masses. And every time we would go and tie up the land somewhere else, we try to go to even Las Vegas. We try to go to New Mexico. We try to go to Dallas and Austin and other places. We would start looking into it. Lake Tahoe. We would see this Phoenix, the areas that were just very interesting. Developers in Florida and Miami would tell us, hey, what are you doing in Houston? Our profit margins here are huge. Of course, a lot of those guys went out of business because that market was much more dramatically fluctuating in bad periods of time. Our market was not as profitable, but very steady. And every time we would attempt to go and find a new market, we would realize that we had enough going on here. And we would find more properties in a new development and much more that we could get our hands on. So we go, why are we going to spread ourselves thin and start complicating our lives by reaching other markets where we are yet to saturate our own? Let's just focus here and stay here. And that turned out to be a good thing, at least according to the business model that we had.
Are you still doing that? And what does that look like today?
Well, of course, the housing bubble showed up, as we all know, destroyed our company. We were over leveraged in a crazy way. We had hundreds of homes on the ground. We had hundreds of lots being developed at the time. We were at the peak of our game. We had a very sophisticated infrastructure with every department of the process in-house. And overnight, they turn off the switch, no sales, no profit, no income. And we began to drain our savings and our equity over the following few years. It was horrifying. It was the previous failures came in very handy in this particular case because I knew how to navigate through these type of situations. It was horrendous, stressful, and I can't even explain what we went through for a very long period of time. But little by little, without knowing, just going one day at a time and doing whatever we needed to do that day to stay in business and to live to see another day, one day we made it. Don't ask me how. We had enough equity. We had a lot of savings. We were diversified. We were in a market that was relatively stable, although horrible, but not compared to other places. And we began to get back to our old days where sales came back to normal. Profits, all of a sudden, we were the only game in town. A lot of people, most people had gone out of business. And that's when we started making a killing. But this time around, we began to do things a little bit differently. With less leverage, we learned another lesson. We began to not over leverage land, which is a scary thing to do. Because in a bad market, you can fire sell a house or a rental income property. There's always investors ready to buy properties in under stress situations. But land, raw land, nobody wants it in the difficult. The pool of buyers is very small. Only other developers, and they're not around right at that moment. So we learned that, and we don't leverage land. We run our business much more efficiently with a lot less overhead. We outsource a lot of services, and now we're diversified in rental income, and now we have some commercial and some, for example, now we do a lot of land development for other builders, not just for ourselves. So, we began to do a little bit of other things within the realm of real estate.
Jose, when you go through those difficult situations, and it sounds like you've been through many of them with your businesses, that period of uncertainty where the money's not there, it doesn't seem like it's ever going to be there. Mentally, what resources have you built up over time to kind of help you through those periods from a mental standpoint? Because that can really do a number on you when you face those situations.
I've gone through difficult times many times, difficult periods within economies, but the best medicine is prevention. The best option to minimize the impact of a bad cycle is to know that it's coming and prepare for it before it hits you. So what we learn from some of these is, for example, to have reserves, to not get overly optimistic about any given period of time, to always think months and even years ahead. I know it's hard at first when you're just starting. When you are a newcomer, a new entrepreneur, or a new business, all you have is desire, willingness, and you have nothing to lose when you gamble at all. So I don't blame anybody who just over leverages and puts everything out there to see what happens. But once you start building a business and some equity and establishing yourself, you need to start taking some of those steps. So the solution has been planning a little more, becoming a little more efficient, studying the market, listening to the signs. Because all of us entrepreneurs and developers are a little bit stubborn, and we're also in denial. When you have an infrastructure and a business and developments and things are moving along, you tend to think that things are going to continue doing well without listening. And the signs are out there: inventories, employment, growth, certainty or uncertainty. all of these aspects of the economy, other than the media. I don't listen to the media. I like to listen to tangible financial and cyclical economic data that's out there. And if you pay attention to it, you have better chances of doing the right thing. The values, when values start skyrocketing, when land starts getting too expensive and your numbers start getting very tight, that means that you need to start paying attention and slowing things down. So there's this phrase that I like: be greedy when everyone is fearful, and be fearful when everybody gets greedy. So that's something we need to pay attention to in real estate.
Jose, how would our listeners find out more about you or get a hold of you?
JoseBerlanga.com. I have my website. And there it shows several of my companies. Most of them don't have a website because they're just investment firms. My YouTube account, there's very little out there. I've been very anonymous in the business world, and so this is a treat. Doing these interviews is certainly very fun for me. But we're doing more and more of them where people can see them on our YouTube channel.
What's your favorite hack or app?
I'm gonna answer by saying that I am the contrary. As I told you, I started very young in business, in technology. I surround myself with people who are very good at it, and I've been very slow. I think I was the last person in the planet to have an email and to have an iPhone, and I'm always behind. I've been so old school in technology. I focus on real estate hacks, sort of in actual business hacks rather than technological ones, because I'm horrible at them. But I have a great group of younger people who are masterful at that. I like the real estate hack, which is doing a lot of 1031 exchanges. I like the building a home for yourself if you're in the business, and enjoying, if you're married, $500,000 worth of profit that is exempt from taxes. There's a lot of real estate hacks nowadays that are perfectly acceptable, especially if you're in the business. You should take advantage of all of those great tax savings in the world of real estate.
Jose, it's been a real pleasure talking with you, and I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing, not just your successes, but your failures as well, and being so, clear-sighted as to why those failures happen in the first place. I think that's a real help to hear people with your experience share those experiences. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure, Brian. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. And remember to save the date for the Midwest Real Estate Investor Conference on April 24th and 25th of 2025 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's going to be an event you won't want to miss, packed with invaluable sessions and opportunities to connect with like-minded investors. Keep listening for more updates, and we look forward to seeing you there. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.